This is Block 11, Reagan's Revolution, Part 2, Carter and Malaise, with the section, the election of 1976. Before these new Republicans took power, though, the presidency of Jimmy Carter intervened. In 1976, the Democrats, smarting from their disaster of 1972, where very, very liberal George McGovern had been crushed by Nixon, nominated a political dark horse. Jimmy Carter, the governor of Georgia, a southern state. Now here's the Democratic Party trying to go back south and recapture the South. They nominated Jimmy Carter for the White House. He was a mixture of Christianity, raised himself up from his bootstraps life story as a good life story, a reasoned, non-radical opposition to the Vietnam War, plus the fact that he was not tainted by Richard Nixon, made him a formidable candidate. And Carter, now you have to remember something, that this is right after Watergate. Ford's only been president 2 years. He pardoned Nixon. The country has been dealing with, all of the stuff that came out about the country being misled about Vietnam, misled about Watergate. And Jimmy Carter got on television and said to the American people, "I'll never lie. I'll never lie." And the American people were very willing to believe him after they had dealt with Johnson and Nixon. The Republicans ran Gerald Ford, who was hurting from his pardon of Nixon. He was hurting from continued inflation in the American economy and the final collapse of South Vietnam. Now, the 1976 election was very close, as you can tell, that the popular vote was about 1.5 million votes only separated Carter and Ford. Ford carried the West. Carter carried the South. It was the last time Southerners went home to the Democratic Party in large numbers. The final tally was 297 electoral votes for Carter and 240 for Ford. So Jimmy Carter took the reins of power in 1977 with a lot of problems on his hands, starting with economic problems. The economy was already suffering under inflation, stagnation, oil shocks, reduced competitiveness, high taxes. Carter tried a Keynesian stimulative approach that did not work. Inflation started galloping along again, interest rates spiked as well, and the combination of high interest rates and high inflation led to significant unemployment. Government tried to make money more expensive to slow down inflation, but all that did was raise interest rates. By 1978, the middle of Carter's presidency, inflation was nearly 10% a year. Basic interest on a home loan was 15% a year. It's about 4 today. Unemployment also started to rise. And then Carter's opponents came up with a new measurement to judge President Carter's effectiveness. They called it the misery index. And what the misery index was you add up inflation and you add to it unemployment, and Carter's opponents did just that happily. And what you got was known as the misery index. And as you can see, it starts over here, that when Carter became president in 1976, or in the last year of Ford, the misery index, which is inflation plus unemployment, was around 15, and it spiked as the months went through 1977, 1978, 1979. This misery index kept going up and up and up, and it peaked at 22 during Carter's term. It had been as low as 3 under Eisenhower. Carter doesn't know what to do. In response to these economic problems, President Carter retreated to Camp David and invited over 100 experts in various fields to report to him what was wrong with the American economy and what could be done to fix it. He was kind of out of the public eye for over a week, and people were wondering, what is the president going to, kind of come down from the mountain with? And he did come down from the mountain, and he gave a primetime address to the American people on television, and his address left the people stunned and could not believe that this is what they were hearing from their president. And in his speech, Carter proceeded to seemingly blame the American people for their own problems. He said that the American people were too materialistic, said that the American people were suffering from a moral crisis, a spiritual crisis. And look, is that true? Yeah, that we are very materialistic people, probably too materialistic. Carter was a devout, believing Christian. Was American society less religious than it had been in the past? Yeah. When people, think they can be rich and can't get it, do you get spiritual issues? Yeah, you do. So was there some truth in what Jimmy Carter said? Yeah, I think anyone might agree with that. But here's the problem. Most people do not like to be lectured at, especially by their president. Most Americans do not like to be blamed. Most people do not like to have the finger pointed at them for their own problems. And a lot of people, they don't, if they're unemployed, they don't think it's their fault. If they can't get a loan for their house, they don't think it's their fault. If gas prices are too high, they don't think it's their fault. So a lot of Americans, were personally affronted by President Carter. And they said, look, unemployment is high, inflation is high, interest rates are too high. This is something that the president needs to deal with. That it's not my problem that I want, a new car or I want a house to raise my children in. This is not a problem. The problem is President Carter. And his malaise speech, as it came to be called, he said that the American people were suffering a malaise. Struck a lot of Americans as unfeeling, untrue, and unbecoming of the President of the United States. And Carter began to weaken as a president.